Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Marsha Vanwynsberghe, who is a fellow podcaster. She's a storytelling business coach and a speaker, and she's also a six-time best-selling author of When She Stopped Asking Why. Marsha, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan.
So before we get started in the conversation, just tell my listeners a little bit about who Marsha is.
Marsha is a whole mix of things: a mom to two full-grown sons, a wife, speaker, published author almost 7 times over, and 2 times podcaster. I have 2 different podcasts that we run with. And I am someone who is fascinated by helping people to learn how to share vulnerable stories, because we all have these vulnerable stories, every single one of us, right? We're not unique. And we sometimes hide behind them because we don't want people to see them, but there's so much magic in who we are, and our experiences have made us who we are. So I love to really help people dive down and learn how to share that.
I love that. And that's really what this podcast is about, is storytelling. And, I feel that every person's got a story to tell and they're all very inspirational, and that's kind of where the subtitle of the podcast, Many Little People in Many Little Places, comes from, is that, I truly do believe that everyone has an inspiring story to tell. And, to give them a platform is really, what I enjoy most about, podcasting. So at what point, in your life did you really start to understand how powerful storytelling can be?
That's a great question. I can say that I found how powerful storytelling can be at a time that was a super difficult time in my life, when we were dealing with teen substance abuse and our kids literally came out of nowhere. And during that time, I became this person who was, the researcher, the mom, looking for answers, looking for solutions, and at the same time, hiding how difficult life was. And if there's anything that we've learned over the years, that the more we hide, the more shame grows. The more we block everyone else out, the more alone we feel. And I stayed in that cycle for a really long time and became just this fighter that I will find the answers on my own if I have to. And if I have to do life by myself, then I will. That was this independent, feisty, personality trait. But what happened is I ended up feeling super, super isolated and really struggling with why is nobody here to help? Now, I wouldn't let a whole lot of people in either during that time, to be fair. And through counseling, through support, through mentors, one of the things that was introduced to me is like, why don't you start to look on, Facebook? Is there Facebook groups that you can connect with people? Is there support groups that you can join? And my husband and I joined a parent support group at this time, and he was really reluctant. He was like, I don't want to go in. I'm like, we've got to get some support. We've got to figure out what we're doing. And we walked into like a full room of parents in one small region in our area. And we both went, okay, so this is obviously not just us. And I think that was the first piece. Then being introduced to a couple of different Facebook groups at the time. And I'll never forget when I joined this one group. It was I think it was Canadian at that time, but moms who were dealing with substance abuse. And I think there was 5,000 members in it. And I went, whoa, what? Like if there's one thing that you can learn to do, is when you can step outside of yourself and recognize that you're not the only person who's struggling. And I think we often feel that we are the only person who is struggling because we don't like to talk about the difficult things in life. And so that started to open up the eyes for me that there's a lot going on here that I didn't recognize or realize. And it wasn't just me. And I remember saying to my counselor at the time that, like, no matter where I go, there's no information. Nobody is talking about these things. And she just looked at me and she said, maybe that's because you're supposed to. And honestly, that was a switch for me. I just went, maybe I am supposed to do something with this, and maybe I can start to talk about stories, and maybe I can start to share emotions. Maybe I can start to open those doors. And that's really where storytelling came from. So the first couple of years was me learning how to share my story in a way that left everyone in integrity and was a way to support others. And it wasn't until later than that I started to recognize that people were coming to me asking, but how do I share a difficult story? And that's kind of really where all of the storytelling pieces came from.
Yeah. And I love that. I love the fact that, opening up that vulnerability, which can be difficult. And, I think for many years in our society was viewed as a weakness if you showed your vulnerability, where it is in fact an incredible strength and very brave to show your vulnerability, to show people that we are all human and we're all flawed and we all have these, crazy feelings just spinning around. And you know, back earlier this year, I did a series of podcasts. We volunteered at a place in Texas called the Dream Center, which is a faith-based drug and rehabilitation center in Beaumont, Texas. And I think I did a series of about 6 or 7 interviews with some of the residents there that were going through their recovery process. And, again, explaining to them that, being vulnerable and, being able to tell their story as to how they got there and how they're on the rebound will be incredibly inspiring to others who are going through that. And, to this day, they're still some of my most listened to shows. And when you hear what some of these guys went through, I mean, digging in dumpsters for, half drank beer cans and stuff like that. And, most of them have no idea why they're still alive today,
Right.
like how they survived, what they did. And just, again, just incredibly inspiring stories, but incredibly brave on their part to be able to share them. So when, when somebody's coming to you and they're reluctant to show that vulnerability, like, what conversation are you having with them to say, look, this isn't weakness, this is strength, this is exact opposite?
Mm, yeah, I love that question because I think that's kind of where we have to start. And most people, it's funny because I hear it a lot. People will say, I so admire like that you get to be vulnerable with people. And I'm like, it's funny, as humans, you admire my vulnerability as a strength and you judge it in yourself as a weakness. It's not a weakness. Like, you're actually, do you see the mirror? Like, you're looking at me and thinking, why can't I do that? When actually you're judging the exact same thing in yourself as a weakness. It's not a weakness. It actually can help you heal in more ways than I could ever even describe, and can continue to show you your path to your purpose. The one thing that I think is important is when it comes to like, how do I show up and share? I think the first thing is that I like to explain that we're either in or on our story. And when we're in our story, we're stuck in it. We're replaying all the scenarios. We're looking for, what did I do wrong? How did we get here? It's a victim mindset. There's no judgment. I spent many years in that space. We're very angry. That's exactly where my book title came from, is learning to shift from the victim mindset. Stop asking why. If you're in it and you're stuck in it, that's probably not the space to share, because we don't always have good perspective when we're in that space, right? We don't have perspective because we're looking for external answers to explain why we're there. So when a person is in that space, but if they've asked for, how do I do this? I'm like start binging content, start listening, really start asking different questions, because I don't like the word bad. Hard things can happen to good people all the time. You're not a bad person because you've had challenging, like some of the people that most of us look up to and admire walked through hell that we could never even like imagine. So many people have done it and have shown proof that it's possible. So I think that's the first thing, is looking at like, where are you in the story? Are you in a space of anger and resentment and frustration and comparison? Because if you are, that's probably not the time to share. It's only going to attract more of that back to you. That's not going to be a solution. It's not going to support you. So that would be the first thing that I would say. And when you are in a space of, okay, I feel like I can be vulnerable and I want to put this out there, then it comes down to like, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? And when you start to let people see the experiences that you have come through, the emotions, like humans, we connect on emotions, pain, struggle. We all do. When you allow others to see that, they can then see that they have struggled in that way as well. And you just become that mirror. And all of a sudden, you're now building connection with people that you never planned on. Like when I look at the people that are in my life now, majority of them were not here 6, 7 years ago. And it's because I've attracted a whole group of people that really, like, we do lift each other up. We do lift each other up and we do help to shift it. So vulnerability is an incredibly powerful thing when you're in the space. And I don't think we're ever ready, but when you're in the space of feeling like, okay, I think I want to give this a try. I want to learn how to do it. If you can do it from a space of being on your story versus stuck in it, it really can change the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sense of community, by putting yourself in those spaces with others who are, have gone through or are going through something that you went through, um, is a huge asset as well. Because at the end of the day, I think as human beings, we all still, um, really, really desire connection. And I think that was, so evident just a couple years ago when that connection was completely ripped from our being, you know. Um, and like I tell people all the time, like I am, at the root of my core, I am an introvert, but yet I still long for connection with, you know, it's different than just meeting people. Like it's truly connecting with people at a different level and a deep level. And I think every human being, whether you're extroverted, whether introverted, you still desire that connection. We are all still connected, um, whether we want to be or not. So I think those type of support groups and stuff like that are so important. Um, and it's different from, because another thing I truly believe in is getting out and speaking and meeting people that aren't necessarily like you. And I think there's a balance there. It's, I think politically we've kind of created like this echo chamber, but we don't, that's not like, it's different. A support group is different than an echo chamber. Like politically, I'm of the belief of go talk to someone who doesn't have the same views as you. Um, on that connection point and that deeper connection point, it's like connect with someone who has gone through the same thing as you, because again, they're probably going to have a different perspective of how they got through it than what you necessarily have. So you're not creating an echo chamber. You're creating connection and perspective to get through it. So that's something that I always, strongly believe in is just those connections. So, what did you like when you went into this room of like 5,000 other parents? Like, what was like that first reaction of, again, certainly it had, I'm sure it had to be partly like we definitely aren't alone,
Yeah.
but what went through your head, walking into that room?
I found at that point when we first so that was a Facebook group, that was how big it was. And then even like other groups we went into, there was just multiple parents. And when I first got into it, it was like, okay, A, I'm not alone. B, I'm not the only person who's struggling with this. C, I couldn't have done everything wrong if this is like there's all these other parents. And I mean, truth be told, that was something I was stuck on, is that I had failed. As a mom, this is like, your job is to fix this unwritten contract that I signed somewhere, and that it was mine. And so learning that, so it put me as that bit of a fly in the wall where I was able to observe and see, and the communication and things that were happening. And it also, like, there was a point there where we didn't go a day without a mom commenting that one of their kids have lost their battle. Like sadly, it became a very normal daily occurrence to be seeing this. And there were times it was like, I don't know if I can stay in this space, because it was really heavy and it was hard. But it was this beautiful space of strangers connecting, supporting, not judging, not being critical, like lifting each other up, doing their best to hold space. And I think it just reminded me how we are looking sometimes for our closest connections of people and thinking, why are they not doing this for me? Why are they not holding this space for me? When there's like 8 billion people on the planet, we might actually find them in places that we don't expect it. And so I did connect with people in this space, and it just really started to open up that, we're all in different parts of this journey, but we're all in this journey. And I think the other big piece is that, which led me to start to share my story. So many of us didn't hit the stereotypical model of what you thought a parent would look like who was dealing with this. And I still think that's incredibly important right now, because I do think that it's easier for us to assume that only parents with this X, Y, and Z struggle with this. I think that's easier for us to assume. And because I don't fit that model, became one of the reasons why I started to speak, because was there a bit of a shock factor and a little bit of a like, what? That I wouldn't have, that surprises me. It just adds to the whole picture that this is a much bigger problem than what we're talking about. And so those are some of the things that I learned. I got to this space where I started to check in the group a little bit less and a little bit less, because I started to understand, like, what do I need energy wise, what's going to serve me, what's going to help me, etc. But I do know that there are 4 women in Canada. Well, I was 4. There was 3 other women in Canada that we connected in the very beginning in that group in probably 2015. And my boys were the only ones that are alive still out of that. And that even was like almost a guilt thing of trying to figure out this. So I learned a lot about myself in that space. I'm grateful for that space, because I didn't have to go anywhere I could just log on my computer and find that was there. And in those spaces, I have connected with people who are still in my life today. So it's being open. Vulnerability leads to that, right? Like, vulnerability to even be in those spaces has allowed me to make some of those connections. So that's the thing I want to say is that we can find those connections in places we might not expect it, but that can help to support us, because when we're talking about difficult stories, you might be dealing with a lot of opinions and thoughts and judgments and criticisms from even immediate family. And it's very isolating. So that might require allowing yourself to step into spaces to find other connections to support you during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one thing that is a fact with no doubt whatsoever is that addiction is the most non-prejudiced thing in the world. It
That's a
does
great
not
sentence.
matter.
Great
Yeah.
sentence.
It doesn't matter what color your skin is, what your, socioeconomic status is. None of that, none of that matters. It will
No.
come after you. And it's tough. And you can certainly understand it as a parent. There is that sense of feeling that like you failed, or
Oh yeah.
guilt and all that sort of stuff. And also, what you said about some of your own family probably can be very judgmental, because they don't know. They've never gone through it, so they're judging from a place of complete ignorance, really.
And
And
fear, right? Ignorance
yeah.
and fear. It's very much, that's exactly. And I think when I wasn't at the time, I was really angry, to be honest, because I'm like, and I just finally had to I learned little mantras and cues that worked for me. And it was very simple in the sense that, are you volunteering to come and live in my space for a week so that I can go somewhere and sleep? Oh, you're not? Then I'm not interested. Like, I'm not interested. That became my answer. And I actually did have to separate from family for a while, because I just didn't have the bandwidth for it. And that's okay. I've also been able to look back now and go that I lived in it. I didn't know what to do half the time. Why would I expect anyone else to have an answer? And when we're dealing with these kinds of topics, it really doesn't always bring the best out in everybody. So it's no hard feelings. It's just what we were going through was There was no book for what we were going through.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And that's, like I said, I I had a sister who lost her battle with addiction 2 years ago, in February of 2020. And, she'd gone 40 years of battling that, just in and out of rehabs. And it was, it's a disease that, like I said, it does not matter what your background is. It will affect you equally. And,
Mm-hmm.
again, sadly, she lost that battle. Um, so I can definitely relate to, a lot of what you're saying for sure. So at, at what point throughout your journey then did you determine that you needed to write a book about this and share your story on even a greater scale than just in these groups and on these different social media platforms?
Yeah, it's when I look back at it, it was very much, I think, how did I make those first few leaps? When I first decided that, I think back to the early days, we were having connections with the school. We were like, I was very open with what the challenge was. I didn't hide it. And the school had us at one point. I remember coming in to speak to other parents. So my husband and I went in and spoke to other parents who were struggling. And I could almost sit there and I was watching us and I was like, this is kind of interesting. I think that we're supposed to speak in something. Like, I feel like this is not a fluke. I think we're doing something we're supposed to. And then I got asked to speak on a stage for like a 10-minute talk. And I remember I had the whole thing memorized because I was just like, I was so afraid to stand up and speak. And when I was done, I was completely bombarded with other moms in the washroom in private saying, that's my story. Like, and I'm going, there's not even that many people here. And this is where I'm hearing. So it just became more and more feedback. And I started to speak on other stages. And then I decided to write a collaborative chapter. Then I wrote 2 more collaborative chapters. And I kept feeling called. Like, this was, selfishly, to be honest, it was helping me heal. It was actually helping me heal. I'm not going to lie. It really was. And it was creating this fuel. It was fueling me, listening to these other parents to say, that's me, but I've never told a soul. And that was 40 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, you're carrying this for like 40 years. Like, I can't even carry it for I can't carry it for more than what I'm doing now. And it really hit me how much shame everybody is feeling and holding on to. And that's stopping them from living how they're meant to live. So I just continued, and the stages got bigger and the message got bigger. And I said to my husband, I'm like, I think I want to write a solo book. And he was like, are you sure? And I'm like, no, but I feel called to. And I felt such a strong call to do that. And my intention was that I wanted somebody who had never walked in my story to benefit from it. I wanted it to be it. I wanted it to be that even if you had never lived a day in my life, you could take something from this about what do you do when your life doesn't go according to plan, which is always, right? Which is always. Can we just clarify that? And so what do you do? And so I started to work on my book, and that was in 2017. And I found a person who could support me in self-publishing it. But I had gone through 3 different publishers at that time, and they were all very much about glorifying the story. And I'm like, that's not what I want. I don't want to do that. I think there's a way that I can share my story. And I don't it's not about my kids. It's about what did I have to do to work through that. Not knowing it at the time, that's literally what I'm now doing on a regular basis. But that's where it started from, is the messages got bigger, the story got bigger, and I just kept following my gut with it, even though majority of people didn't believe in it. When I said I wanted to write a solo book, majority of my family was like, have you lost your mind? Like, we don't talk about things like this. We don't tell anybody these kinds of things. I'm like, but that's how we got here. That's why we're in this space. And so that's the path that it went down. And my book is a deep dive on me, really, like my vulnerable story of how did I navigate that. And hence the title, When She Stopped Asking Why. I can tell you, honestly, the turning point was when I stopped asking the why questions. The why questions are victim questions. They don't create any change in our life. As soon as I still to this day, if I say the word why, it's like, no, what do I focus on? What is an action step? What can I do next? And that's how we create change. So it grew organically, and I didn't have any major intention to how it was going to grow. And I think that that's a major blessing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming you weren't a writer or a speaker prior to this.
I was I think my English teacher would probably laugh to think that I was writing, because I was the math and science kid. I was always about like making things make sense. But I did like reading, but I definitely, and speaking wise, I think I spoke at my first public speaking event when I was like 10 years old. My parents tried to talk me out of it because you don't do that. That's a scary thing to do. But I said, I want to do it. And then I won that region and went on to the next region. And they were like, why do you like this? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just felt like the right thing to do. And so podcasting became fairly natural, in the sense I started mine in 2017 when my book was releasing. And it was just, how can we create a platform to help people share stories? How can we create a platform? And over time, it's gotten better. Like, speaking is definitely natural for me. Writing is not always easy, but I still love it.
Yeah. So you truly turned your test into a testimony by
Yes.
being able to share it. And I agree with you that for me, writing is very therapeutic.
Very.
And same with speaking as well. It's again, it's just a very therapeutic process. Almost cathartic to an extent to go through it. So, and I think for you to be able to do that and to write those thoughts down, I'd certainly believe helped in your healing process to get where you are today, for sure. So we're just about out of time, but is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about before we head to my final question?
I think the big thing I just want to say is that if you're listening to this conversation and you think, okay, but I don't want to get up and share my story publicly, you don't have to. But I always ask people to ask themselves, like, is your story holding you back from living the life that you're meant to live? Like, are you stopping yourself because of experiences that you have come through, when actually, like, they're what make you an expert. They give you the experience. Someone somewhere is always praying for solutions you're holding on to. And so even if you don't ever want to speak and share and write, don't let those experiences be something that holds you back from living the life you're meant to live.
Yeah, I love that. Marsha, where can people find you? Where can they get a copy of the book? If they want to connect, if they want to share their story or find out how to share their story, how do they find you?
The easiest way is, even if you start typing on Google Marsha Van W, it comes up. It's the first thing that comes up. So that's my website. That's my social media. It's all Marsha Van W. And my podcast is Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And my second podcast is Everybody Holds a Story, because I'm all about bodies and stories and how we create change in our life. And my solo book is available on Amazon, and it's When She Stopped Asking Why.
Love it. Mm-hmm. So, as you know, the subtitle of my podcast is Many Little People, Many Little Places. And that comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes. What's one of the little things that Marsha does to make the world a little bit better place?
Yeah, I love this quote. I think that I am here and I get to normalize difficult stories and normalize the experiences that we're all having as humans. And I am blessed to be able to reach so many different people to help them to share their stories. If I can share one quick story, when I started my podcast, I had this feeling, this gut feeling, visceral, that you're meant to do this. This is going to reach somewhere. And in about 2018, I started to see downloads happening in Africa. And I started to connect with a girl from Africa. And in 2019, we continued these regular conversations. And she was a survivor of trafficking. And in 2019 and 2020, when we decided to put our collaborative book together, I knew we wanted to have her story in it, and I put a GoFundMe out there. We were able to have her as part of it. We've done lives together all the time. You're able to connect with people you've never met yet when you step out and allow yourself to be seen. And we all have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that answer. I really appreciate you taking the time. I love this conversation, and definitely, I think we will help some people with this conversation. So I appreciate you taking the time. And for folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com or danclouser.com. Head on over there, pick up a copy of my most recent book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1, and head over to Amazon, pick up a copy of Marsha's book as well. So, Marsha, again, thank you very much for taking the time. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was my pleasure to be here.